Okay, welcome back to part 2 of this week's lecture on strategic leadership as part of MAN301 Strategic Management. So in part 1 of the lecture, we talked about 3 things. We gave you the introduction, we talked about strategic leadership and defined it and described its importance, why top managers were important, and we discussed the roles that top level managers had. The roles of top-level managers and the factors that influenced managerial discretion. In this second part, we are going to look at the key strategic leadership actions. Now, I want to again emphasize that slide that we talked about when we were talking about factors influencing managerial discretion, even though we didn't spend an enormous amount of time on it, in the lecture, we're going to spend time on that. We're going to spend time on that in the tutorial. It's one of those sections where it's a packed slide, while some of the other ways that we're presenting cover the similar amount of information, but over more slides. So that packed slide is expanded in the tutorial next week. So, key strategic leadership actions. Using this model, using the model that HIT and Island have incorporated in this book, the Hansen HIT Island textbook, we are going to say that effective strategic leadership has 6 factors, 6 actions. If you were to go onto the internet, or if you were to go onto YouTube, you would find pages and pages and pages of links to strategic leadership. And you will find multiple different models of strategic leadership. And some of those models are embedded in the strategic thinking approach to strategic leadership, rather than the linear approach, and some of them are in other models that have been of strategic management and of organisational change. So we're using this model, but I don't want you to think this is the only model that's possible. So the 6 factors that the 6 leadership actions are: determining the strategic direction, exploiting and maintaining core competencies, developing human capital, sustaining an effective organisational culture, emphasising ethical practices, and establishing balanced organisational controls. So we're going to look at each of those in turn. A couple of slides on them in turn. You'll see that also there's some actions to, you'll see some reflection of what we're talking about here in the videos that I have asked you to look at. In particular, not in particular, all 3 videos that you've already looked at also provide you with examples of effective strategic leadership in different contexts. In the highly controlled context of the military, in the creative and event-driven context that is Disney, and in the functional service concept, differentiated products, all of these, of Starbucks. So all of those were to say, well, look, here's managers exhibiting discretionary behaviour, having their decision-making discretion influenced by different aspects of the environment, the organisation, and the characteristics of the manager. Now we're going to look at, if you look at those same type of things and reflect on them as we work through these examples, these strategic leadership actions that demonstrate the exercise of effective strategic leadership. So, clearly a core focus of the strategic management process is setting a strategic direction. That's our vision. That's our mission. We talked about it in week 1, and then week 2 and 3 in understanding our strategic context. It is the top managers who are the people that are making the decision about the whole organisation, and it's the top managers, therefore, that are setting this goal, setting the direction. A long-term vision has 2 parts: a core ideology. How do we do things around here? What is our direction? What are our competencies and our characteristics and our capabilities? What are the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities that create or that we combine together to create our direction, our core ideology? And the second part is, what is the future that we want to get to? Where do we want to be now? Then where are we now? Where do we want to be in the future? You can see how that directly relates to definitional work and structural work we did in week 1, week 2, week 3. And also, setting a vision guides our strategic choice and our implementation choices. The second component of the second action of strategic leadership is effectively managing the firm's resources. Remember our definition of strategy talked about the allocation of resources? Strategic leaders should have the ability to manage the firm's portfolio of resources by organising them into capabilities and structuring the firm to use the capabilities to achieve competitive advantage. Now, this particular model draws from the exploring strategy model, which is a variation and an extension of the strategic management process model. We could replace that word capabilities with competencies as well if we wanted to. Resources can be categorized in the following way: financial capital, human capital, social capital, organizational capital. And when you reflect on those 3 video examples we just saw, we have different combinations of those 4 types of capital being combined in different ways by each of those 3 managers: Schultz, Petraeus, and Disney's CEO. Thirdly, exploiting and maintaining core competencies. Exploiting and maintaining core competencies. Just give me a moment. Yes, I've just flipped past the slide. I'm back on track. When I try to rush things, because we are rushing this a little bit because I'm having to redo it, not in the normal way where I prepare it the day before and then do a little bit of editing and then put it up. I'm doing it straight up to try to get it to you so that we're ahead of the lecture time all the way through. Leaders must ensure that the firm capitalises on the skills and develops core competencies. Then strategic leaders are ultimately responsible for effective development and exploitation of core competencies across different functional units. Core competencies can only be developed and exploited by developing the capabilities of human capital. It's people that make decisions about core competencies. So, human capital refers to the knowledge, the skills of the entire workforce of the organisation. The firms need to invest in their human capital to formulate and implement strategies effectively. So we're definitely not looking at an accounting view of the firm or an economic view of the firm. We're looking at a strategic view of the firm that's based on resources, the resource-based view. So, how do we develop? Sorry, I'm just flicking back and forth. I don't know what I'm doing there. There we go. How do we develop human capital? People are who make the decisions. We do it throughout the way we recruit and select. We do it through training and development. We do it through performance management. We do it through rewards. We do it through teamwork. So all that discussion that you had in HRM was not about compliance in the HRM topic that you've done as part of your course, the HRM unit that you've done as part of your course. What it was about is how we use our human capital to give us competitive advantage. How we use our human capital to give us competitive advantage. Leaders have a large role in developing human capital because they are the people that have the responsibility for acquiring the skills to help develop human capital, to create learning context-specific issues, to provide international work experience, and to offer management training programs. So the leader's role in nurturing human capital comes from their ability to make decisions about those things. It also comes because they can offer knowledge development programs, they can use in-house and external providers for corporate education, they can create and sustain an effective organisational culture, all of which develops human capital. Which links us on to our next topic area, which is sustaining an effective organisational culture. An organisational culture is a set of ideologies, symbols and core values that are shared through the firm and influences the way it conducts business. Shaping the context within the firm formulates and implements its strategy. Shaping the culture is the central task of strategic leaders. In our three examples from the videos you've watched, Petraeus, Disney, and Starbucks, those three have dramatically different organisational cultures. And the reason they have dramatically different organisational cultures is in part because they're implementing dramatically different strategies using different combinations of human capital linked to the constraints that the managers are under, whether they're external constraints, internal constraints, or the manager's organisational constraints, or the manager's own constraints. Those three things there what are influencing the managerial discretion that influences all these decisions about their actions. Having an entrepreneurial mindset, obviously there's a balance of that. Petraeus probably needed less of an entrepreneurial mindset than Starbucks, and Disney probably needed more than Starbucks. An organisational culture that encourages the pursuit of entrepreneurial actions has a different culture than an organisation that doesn't. Frequently, large organisations discourage entrepreneurship, so people have to leave that organisation to grow as an individual. And that may, in fact, enable them to create, on some strategic choices, particularly cost-based strategic choices, some competitive advantage. But if you're trying to be innovative, if you're trying to differentiate, you want to be able to enable that to occur. And of course, the nature of the industry influences that, the internal organisation influences that, the manager's decisions influence that, the manager's characteristics influence that. But for a firm to be involved in a competitive dynamic environment, it needs to have an entrepreneurial, or at least some areas that are pursuing entrepreneurialism. So an entrepreneurial orientation encourages autonomy, innovativeness, risk-taking, proactiveness, and competitive aggressiveness. And managers and leaders contribute to that because they are able to reward or punish. They're able to create a culture that enables that to occur, to support and reward people taking risks. You won't take risks if all your performance indicators are tied to achieving a narrow goal. Changing the organisational culture is another role of the managers. You do that as strategic leaders. You need to recognise what your culture is and when you need to change it. It folds back to that concept of vision. Where are we now? Where do we want to be? How do we make our organisation go in that direction, building on our people? Effective communication, effective problem solving, selecting the right people, effective performance appraisals, and appropriate reward systems link to that. See how they also link to your discussion in another course, in your HRM course, Human Resource Management course. So how do you do that? Culture changes only succeed if they're supported by the CEO and the top management team, and a sufficient proportion of middle managers to make that happen. You emphasize if you're going to change culture, you have to bring people along with you. And that folds back to some of the interpersonal skills that we talked about earlier in this session that enable a manager to be able to be strategic, to be a strategic leader. Emphasis on ethical practices. Now, I know some of you were in my class this morning, and therefore you've just spent an entire session talking about ethical leadership and ethical culture. And what I'm going to do here is spend maybe 2 slides on it. Ethical practices are not a barrier to economic performance. They're not a barrier to sustainable competitive relationships. They, in fact, are a way to get commitment and engagement of your stakeholders. The effectiveness of the processes used to implement the firm's strategies increases when they're ethical. And ethical practices create social capital and goodwill that feed into other parts of the organisation. In fact, if you have an ethical relationship with your suppliers are more likely to bring their innovations, their things that add value to your organisation, to you first, because they have that relationship. If your customers trust you, you're more likely to get information that enables you to sell more to them. Ethical organisational leaders do the following. They establish and communicate organisational goals linked to the ethical standards of the organisation. They continuously revise their code of conduct. They disseminate the code of conduct to all stakeholders. They develop and implement methods and procedures to achieve the firm's ethical behaviours, ethical standards. They reward ethical behaviours, and they create a work environment where people are treated with dignity. Right. Which brings us to the last aspect that I want to cover, which is the balanced scorecard. Establishing balanced organisational controls. Controls are an important part of strategy implementation. They are formal and informal informational-based procedures and policies used by managers to maintain and change the pattern of behaviour within the organisation, to change the pattern of activities, to understand where resources need to be allocated or where they can be taken away, to move resources between areas, to align them with your strategic mission and vision, your business, your corporate level strategies. Successful strategic managers have a balance between strategic control and financial control. We talked about strategic control and financial control last week in class. And we gave you a video on the balanced scorecard and the differences between strategic and financial control. Controls help strategic leaders to build credibility and demonstrate the value of strategies and promote strategic change. So what does a balanced scorecard look like? Again, last week, video on the balanced scorecard, extending what the discussion of organisational structure and control. This week, revisiting it from a strategic leadership perspective. The balanced scorecard, a framework used to verify that the firm has established both strategic and financial controls. 4 perspectives in the balanced scorecard are financial, customer, internal business processes, and learning and growth. Learning and growth and internal business growth, both of those can be linked to innovation. So what are the type of criteria that a strategic leader would put in place as part of the strategic action of establishing balanced controls? Financial controls could be things like cash flow, return on equity, return on assets. Customer controls could be assessment of the ability to meet needs, effective customer service practices, repeat business, quality of communications with customers, market share. Internal business processes are asset utilization, improvements of employee morale and changes in turnover rates. And learning and growth is improvements in innovation ability, the number of new products compared with competitors. And remember, learning and growth can also be about learning and growth within internal innovation internally as well as externally, and increasing employee skills. So, what have we done in today's lecture? Noting that there are additional things that additional source information that supports what I've talked about today, and noting again that a part of what you need to prepare today is related to next week's tutorial and the influences on managerial discretion. We have covered the following. We've defined strategic leadership and described the importance of top-level managers. We've discussed the role of top-level managers and the influence on managerial discretion, and we've discussed key strategic leadership actions. Okay. Watch the videos that we've added that are exemplar videos of these areas. I will see you next week in class.